A doctor went to check on a terminally ill millionaire, but when his brother showed up, she was shocked. St. Gabriel's Hospital was bustling with activity on a summer afternoon. Nurses were moving quickly through the corridors, phones were ringing off the hook, and the scent of disinfectant permeated the air. In the midst of this organized chaos, Dr. Laura Montero walked steadily toward the emergency room. Her white coat billowed behind her, as her brown eyes, framed by thin-rimmed glasses, scanned the hallway for any impending emergencies. Laura was known at the hospital for her unwavering dedication and ability to remain calm in the most stressful situations. However, nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. As she rounded the corner to the emergency room, Laura stopped in her tracks. There, sitting on one of the gurneys, with a pale face and a pained expression, was her husband, Peter Alvarez. Laura's heart skipped a beat. What was Peter doing here? He should be in his office running his business empire, not in the hospital looking so vulnerable. Peter. Laura's voice came out as a whisper as she approached the gurney. What happened? Peter looked up. His blue eyes, normally full of confidence, now showed a mixture of pain and guilt. Laura, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. Laura felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Told me what? Peter took a deep breath before dropping the bombshell that would change their lives forever. I have cancer, Laura. Terminal cancer. I was diagnosed 6 months ago. Laura's world stopped. Peter's words echoed in her ears, but her mind refused to process them. Cancer. Terminal. 6 months. The questions swirled around in her head, struggling to come out all at once. How? Why? Why? Laura struggled to form a coherent sentence. Why didn't you tell me? Peter looked down, unable to face the pain and confusion in his wife's eyes. I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could handle it on my own. That maybe I'd find a miracle cure before I had to tell you. Laura felt anger mingle with her initial shock. Handle it alone? A miracle cure? Peter, I'm a doctor. How could you keep something like this from me? Tears began to well up in Peter's eyes. I know. It was stupid and selfish. I was afraid, Laura. Afraid to see the disappointment in your eyes, afraid of being a burden. Laura closed her eyes, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. When she opened them again, her look was one of professional determination. I need to see your tests. Talk to your oncologist. We're going to face this together, Peter. But even as he spoke those words, Laura felt that something fundamental had broken between them. Trust, the pillar of their marriage, had crumbled. The next few days were a whirlwind of exams, consultations, and tense discussions. Laura immersed herself in Peter's case with the same intensity with which she approached any medical challenge, but each new piece of information she discovered was like a dagger in her heart. The cancer was advanced, treatment options were limited, and the prognosis was grim. One night, while reviewing Peter's medical records in her home study, Laura felt she could take no more. The betrayal of Peter's lie, combined with the pain of knowing she might lose him, was too much to bear. She made a decision she never thought she would make. The next morning, her eyes swollen from crying and lack of sleep, Laura confronted Peter in the kitchen. I can't go on like this, Peter, she said, in a trembling but firm voice. I love you, but you've broken my trust in a way I don't know if I can forgive. I need time and space to process all of this. I think we should separate. Peter looked at her with a mixture of pain and resignation. I understand, Laura. I know I've hurt you deeply. If that's what you need, I'll respect that. Thus, in the midst of the emotional storm caused by Peter's illness, their marriage came to an end. Laura moved into a small apartment near the hospital, immersing herself further in her work to escape the pain of her personal life. Little did Laura know that this was only the beginning of a series of revelations that would shake the foundations of her world and lead her down a path she could never have imagined. Weeks after her separation from Peter, Laura found herself in the hospital laboratory, reviewing the results of routine tests. Her mind was torn between work and thoughts of her failed marriage when something on the computer screen caught her attention. She frowned, leaning closer to the screen. The results of her brother Charles's blood test showed something unusual. Laura had insisted that Charles get a full checkup after he mentioned some worrisome symptoms, but what she was seeing now had nothing to do with those symptoms. This can't be right. she muttered to herself, going over the data again and again. According to the results, Charles's blood type was incompatible with his parents'. Laura knew basic genetics well. This meant that Charles could not be his parents' biological child. Laura's heart began to pound. How was this possible? She and Charles had grown up together, sharing a childhood full of happy memories. They had baby pictures, family stories. How could he not be her real brother? With trembling hands, Laura dialed Charles's number. She needed answers, and she needed them now. "Laura?" Charles's cheerful voice rang on the other end of the line. "What's up, sis? Did you get my results yet?" Laura took a deep breath. "Charles, I need you to come to the hospital. There's something we need to discuss in person." There was a pause. "Laura, you're scaring me. Is everything okay?" "Just come, please. It's important." An hour later, Charles walked into Laura's office. His face showed concern, but also curiosity. Laura looked at him, searching for family similarities she had always taken for granted. Now, with this new information, she wondered how she had not noticed the differences before. "Charles, please sit down," Laura said, indicating the chair in front of his desk. "There is something in your results that, well, that has revealed something unexpected." Charles sat down, his expression turning serious. "What is it, Laura? Am I sick?" Laura shook her head. "No, that's not it. Charles, according to these results, your blood type is incompatible with our parents. Genetically, it's impossible for you to be their biological child." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles looked at Laura, then at the papers on the desk, then back at Laura. His face went through a series of emotions: confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally, a kind of resignation. "Charles, did you know about this?" asked Laura softly. Charles closed his eyes and sighed deeply. When he opened them again, there were tears in them. "Yes, I knew, or at least I suspected something like this might be possible." Laura felt the ground shift beneath her feet for the second time in a few weeks. "What do you mean?" Charles leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "A few years ago, I found some old papers in the attic of our parents' house. They were adoption papers, Laura. At first, I thought maybe Mum and Dad had considered adopting at some point and then changed their minds. But there was something about the dates that didn't add up." Laura listened quietly, trying to process this new information. Charles continued, "I confronted Mum about it. She burst into tears and confessed everything to me. I was adopted when I was a baby. My birth parents died in a car accident shortly after my birth." Tears were now running freely down Charles's cheeks. Laura rose from her chair and rounded the desk to hug her brother. No, she mentally corrected herself. The person she had always considered her brother. "Why didn't you tell me?" asked Laura, her voice cracking with emotion. Charles hugged her tightly. "I didn't want anything to change between us, Laura. I was afraid that if you knew, you would see me differently. Besides, to me, you guys are my real family. The papers don't change that." Laura pulled back a little to look Charles in the eye. "Nothing could ever change how I feel about you, Charles. You're my brother, no matter what a blood test or an adoption paper says." They hugged again, letting the tears flow freely. It was a moment of truth, of redefining their relationship, but also of reaffirming the love that bound them together. When they finally separated, Laura sat in the chair next to Charles, holding his hands. "What do we do now?" she asked. Charles shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know, Laura. Part of me has always wanted to know more about my birth parents, but another part is afraid it might open old wounds." Laura nodded sympathetically. "Whatever you decide to do, I'll be by your side. If you want to investigate, I'll help you. If you'd rather leave it as it is, I'll respect that." Charles smiled faintly. "Thank you, Laura. I don't know what I would do without you." As they walked out of Laura's office together, they both felt that something fundamental had changed in their relationship. They were no longer just siblings by upbringing, but had consciously chosen to be family despite the lack of blood ties. Little did they know that this revelation was just the beginning of a journey that would reshape their lives in ways they never could have imagined. The next few months were a whirlwind of emotions and changes for Laura. While dealing with the separation from Peter and the revelation about Charles, she became even more immersed in her work at the hospital. It was during one of her night shifts that she met Sophia. Sophia was an 8-year-old girl who had been brought to the emergency room with a high fever. Laura was immediately captivated by the girl's big brown eyes and her bravery in the face of pain. As she examined her, she noticed that Sophia was alone. "Where are your parents, honey?" asked Laura gently as she took Sophia's temperature. The little girl looked down. "I don't have parents. I live at the Santa Maria orphanage." Laura's heart shrank. There was something about Sophia, a mixture of vulnerability and strength that struck a chord in her. "Don't worry, Sophia. We're going to take good care of you here." As the days passed and Sophia recovered, Laura found herself spending more and more time with the little girl. She read her stories, played with her and listened to her stories about life at the orphanage. Without realizing it, Laura began to feel a special bond with Sophia. One afternoon, as Laura sat by Sophia's bedside, the little girl looked up at her with her big eyes and asked, "Dr. Laura, do you have children?" Laura felt a lump in her throat. "No, Sophia. I don't have children." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Would you like to have them someday?" The question caught Laura by surprise. Before her separation from Peter, having children had been part of her life plan. But now, with everything that had happened, she had hardly thought about it. "Yes," Laura finally answered, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "Yes, I would like that." Sophia smiled. "You'd make a great mom, Dr. Laura." Those words stayed with Laura long after her shift ended. As she drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about Sophia and the idea of being a mother. Was it possible? Could she adopt Sophia? For the next few days, Laura couldn't get the idea out of her head. She talked to Charles about it, seeking his advice and support. "Laura, if you feel it's the right thing to do, you should do it," Charles told her one night as they ate dinner together. "You'd make a wonderful mother, and Sophia is an amazing child." Laura looked at her brother, grateful for his support. It was at that moment that she noticed something different in the way Charles looked at her. There was a warmth in his eyes that went beyond brotherly affection. "Charles," Laura said softly, "is there something you want to tell me?" Charles looked surprised for a moment, then looked down, a slight blush covering his cheeks. I don't know how to say this, Laura. Since we found out we're not biological siblings, my feelings for you have changed." Laura felt her heart racing. A part of her had noticed the subtle changes in her relationship with Charles, but had avoided thinking too much about it. Now, faced with the truth, she didn't know how to react. "Charles, she began, but he gently interrupted her. "You don't have to say anything now, Laura. I know it's complicated and that you've just gone through a difficult separation. I just wanted to be honest with you. Whatever happens, you'll always be the most important person in my life." Laura nodded, grateful for Charles's understanding. "I need time to process all of this," she finally said, "but thank you for your honesty, Charles." The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions for Laura. On one hand, there was the excitement and nervousness of considering adopting Sophia. On the other, there were the confused feelings that Charles' words had awakened in her. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Laura continued to care for Sophia. The girl was improving day by day, and Laura knew that soon she would have to return to the orphanage. The thought of being separated from Sophia caused her pain that she had not anticipated. One afternoon, as they were playing cards in the hospital room, Sophia looked at Laura with her big brown eyes. "Dr. Laura, do you believe in choosing families?" Laura smiled, surprised by the depth of the question. "Yes, Sophia. In fact, I believe they are the strongest families." Sophia nodded as if Laura had confirmed something important. "So do you think we could be family, you and I?" Laura's heart skipped a beat. At that moment, she knew with certainty what she had to do. "I would love to, Sophia," she replied, tears in her eyes. "I would love to be your family." That night, Laura called Charles and asked him to meet her at her apartment. When he arrived, Laura told him about her decision to adopt Sophia. "That's wonderful, Laura," Charles said with a genuine smile. "You're going to be an amazing mother." Laura took Charles's hands in hers. "Thank you, Charles. And there's something else I want to tell you." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, about your feelings for me." Charles held his breath, waiting. "I can't deny that I've felt something changing between us too," Laura continued. "It's confusing and a little scary, but I think we should explore these feelings together." The smile that lit up Charles's face was dazzling. Wordlessly, he pulled Laura to him and kissed her softly. It was a kiss full of promise and new beginnings. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Laura began the process of adopting Sophia, with Charles supporting her every step of the way. Their relationship grew and strengthened, based on years of friendship and mutual trust. Finally, the day came when Sophia officially moved in with Laura. Charles was there, helping to decorate her room and making sure everything was perfect. That night, as Sophia slept in her new room, Laura and Charles sat on the couch, exhausted but happy. "Who would have imagined we would end up like this?" said Laura, leaning back against Charles's chest. Charles hugged her tightly. "Life has amazing ways of taking us exactly where we need to be," he replied. As they fell asleep on the couch, cuddling, Laura thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. From being married to Peter to being separated, from believing Charles was her biological brother to discovering he wasn't, from being a single woman to becoming an adoptive mother and finding a new love. Life was unpredictable, Laura thought, but also beautiful in its ability to surprise and renew. With Sophia and Charles by her side, she felt she had finally found her true home. Laura's life seemed to have found a new balance. Her relationship with Charles was blossoming. Sophia was adjusting beautifully to her new life, and her career at the hospital was going from strength to strength. However, fate had other plans. One spring morning, Laura received a call that rocked her world once again. It was from the hospital where Peter was receiving treatment for his cancer. "Dr. Montero," said the voice on the other end of the line, "I regret to inform you that Mr. Alvarez has had a serious relapse. He is requesting to see you." Laura felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Despite their separation, she had never stopped worrying about Peter. "I'll be there as soon as possible," she replied, her voice trembling. When she arrived at the hospital, Laura found Peter pale and weakened in bed. However, his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Laura," he said in a weak voice, "thank you for coming." Laura sat down beside his bed, instinctively taking his hand. "How are you feeling, Peter?" Peter tried to smile, but it was obvious he was struggling. "I've had better days," he joked weakly. Then his expression turned serious. "Laura, I wanted to see you because I need to ask your forgiveness for hiding my illness from you, for not trusting you. I was an idiot." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes. "Oh, Peter." "No, let me finish," he insisted. "I've had a lot of time to think, and I've realized that the biggest mistake of my life was losing you. I don't expect you to forgive me or to come back to me. I just wanted you to know that." Laura squeezed Peter's hand, overcome with emotion. "I forgive you, Peter," she said softly. "And I want you to know that no matter what happens, you will always hold a special place in my heart." At that moment, Peter's heart monitor began to beep alarmingly. Laura jumped to her feet, her medical instincts taking over. "I need a team in here now," she shouted as she began performing CPR. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Laura worked tirelessly alongside the medical team to stabilize Peter. Finally, late into the night, they managed to get him out of danger. Exhausted, Laura emerged from Peter's room and came face to face with Charles, who had arrived at the hospital after she texted him. "How is he?" asked Charles, concern evident in his voice. Laura dropped into his arms, the emotions of the day finally catching up with her. "He's stable for now," she murmured against his chest, "but it was a close call, Charles. We almost lost him." Charles held her tightly, offering silent comfort. After a moment, Laura pulled away and looked Charles in the eyes. "I need to stay here tonight," she said, "to monitor your condition." Charles nodded sympathetically. "Of course, I'll stay with you." Laura shook her head. "No, go home with Sophia. She needs you there." Charles hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. "Okay, but call me if you need anything at all." After Charles left, Laura went back to Peter's room. She sat by his bedside, watching his chest rise and fall with each breath. As she watched him, a series of memories flooded her mind. Their wedding, their trips together, the shared laughter, the dreams they had built. Despite everything that had happened, despite her new life with Charles and Sophia, Laura realized that a part of her would always love Peter. Not in the same way as before, but with a love transformed by time and circumstance. As the night wore on, Laura found herself reflecting on the turns her life had taken. How could she reconcile her feelings for Peter with her love for Charles? How would this affect her new family with Sophia? She had no clear answers, but she knew one thing for certain. Life was too short and precious to waste it on regrets and resentments. Whatever the future held for her, Laura was determined to face it with love, compassion, and honesty. As the sun began to peek through the hospital window, Laura made a decision. She was going to be completely honest with Charles about her confused feelings. Together, they would find a way to navigate these troubled waters. What Laura didn't know was that this decision would trigger a series of events that would change the course of their lives forever. The next few days were an emotional roller coaster for Laura. Peter stabilized, but his condition remained delicate. Laura found herself dividing her time between the hospital, where she cared for Peter, and home, where Charles and Sophia waited for her. One night, as they ate dinner in silence, Sophia looked at Laura with her big eyes full of concern. "Mama," she said, still trying out the word, "are you sad because Senor Peter is sick?" Laura felt a lump form in her throat. "Yes, honey," she answered honestly. "I'm worried about him." Charles, who had been quietly observing the interaction, took Laura's hand across the table. "We're all worried," he said softly. "Peter was an important part of our lives for a long time." After putting Sophia to bed, Laura and Charles sat on the couch. Laura knew it was time for the conversation she had been putting off. "Charles," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you." Charles looked at her, his eyes full of love and understanding. "I know, Laura. You've been struggling with your feelings ever since Peter got sick again." Laura nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I love you, Charles. That hasn't changed. But seeing Peter like this, it stirred up feelings I thought I'd gotten over. I feel so confused and guilty." Charles pulled her to him, hugging her tightly. "Laura, listen to me. You have nothing to feel guilty about. Love is not something we can control or compartmentalize perfectly. It's complicated and messy, and it's okay for it to be that way." Laura looked at him, surprised by his understanding. "You're not angry?" Charles smiled softly. "How could I be angry?" "Laura, I love you for who you are, and that includes your big heart and your ability to love deeply. Peter was an important part of your life for a long time. It's only natural that you still have feelings for him." Laura was overwhelmed by the gratitude and love she felt for Charles at that moment. "What did I do to deserve you?" she whispered. "The same thing I ask myself every day," Charles replied, kissing her softly. The next few days, Laura felt lighter, having shared her feelings with Charles. Together, they decided that Laura would continue to care for Peter, with Charles's full support. One afternoon, while Laura was at the hospital with Peter, she received an unexpected call. It was from the hospital lab. "Dr. Montero," said the voice on the other end of the line. "We have the results of Mr. Alvarez's latest tests. I think you should come see them personally." Laura's heart skipped a beat. What could they have found? In the lab, Dr. Ramirez, a respected oncologist, was waiting for her with a serious expression. "Laura," he said, using her first name given their years-long professional relationship, "we've discovered something unusual in Peter's blood." Laura held her breath as Dr. Ramirez continued. "It looks like Peter has a rare genetic mutation that could be the key to treating his cancer. It's something we've never seen before." Laura felt her world spinning. "Are you saying there's hope?" Dr. Ramirez nodded cautiously. "There is potential for a new treatment, yes. But Laura, I need you to understand something else. This mutation, it's hereditary." Laura frowned, not fully understanding. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Dr. Ramirez said slowly, that if Peter has this mutation, it is very likely that any biological child of his will also have it." At that moment, Laura felt the ground open up beneath her feet. Her mind flew back to a night, months earlier, just before she discovered Peter's illness. A night of passion and reconciliation that now seemed to belong to another life. "Oh my God," Laura whispered, holding a hand to her belly. "I'm pregnant." Dr. Ramirez looked at her with surprise and then understanding. "Laura, if you are pregnant with Peter, your baby could be the key to saving his life." Laura sat up, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this revelation. A baby that could save Peter's life. A baby that would further complicate her already complicated situation with Charles and Sophia. As she left the lab in shock, Laura knew she had difficult decisions ahead of her, decisions that would affect not only her life, but the lives of everyone she loved. With a mixture of overwhelming emotions, Laura left the hospital needing fresh air to clear her thoughts. She sat on a nearby park bench, her mind spinning with the implications of this new information. A baby, her baby, Peter's baby. A life growing inside her that could be the key to saving her ex-husband. Laura pressed her hands to her belly, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. How could she tell Charles and Sophia? They had just started a family, and now this? Laura felt tears begin to fall down her cheeks. After what seemed like hours, Laura finally got up from the bench. She knew she couldn't put off the inevitable. She had to be honest with Charles, with Peter, with everyone. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Laura sat with Charles in the living room. Her heart was pounding as she mustered the courage to speak. "Charles," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you." Charles looked at her with concern. "What is it, Laura? You know you can tell me anything." Laura took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant," she finally said, the words coming out in a whisper. Charles froze for a moment, processing the information. "Pregnant?" he repeated, his voice mixed with surprise and confusion. "But we don't." "It's Peter's," Laura clarified, tears welling in her eyes. "It was just before we discovered his illness. I'm so sorry, Charles. I didn't know until today." Charles got up from the couch and began pacing the room, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Laura watched him silently, dreading his reaction. Finally, Charles stopped and looked at her. "What do you want to do?" he asked softly. The question took Laura by surprise. She expected anger, accusations, but not this understanding calm. I don't know," Laura admitted. "There's more, Charles. The baby could be the key to saving Peter. He has a rare genetic mutation that could be the basis for a new treatment." Charles sat back down next to Laura, taking her hands in his. "Laura, I love you. And I love the family we've made with Sophia. But I understand that this is bigger than us. Whatever decision you make, I'll be by your side." Laura felt her heart swell with love and gratitude for Charles. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "Don't say that," Charles replied, hugging her. "We're a team, remember? We'll face this together." The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Laura had to inform Peter about the pregnancy and the possibility of further treatment. The news brought a spark of hope to Peter's eyes that Laura had not seen in a long time. Sophia, with the innocence and wisdom that only children possess, accepted the baby news with enthusiasm. "I'm going to be a big sister?" she asked excitedly. "I've always wanted a little brother or sister." As the pregnancy progressed, Laura worked tirelessly with the medical team to develop a treatment for Peter based on the baby's genetic mutation. It was a long and grueling process, full of ups and downs, but finally, when Laura was in her 7th month of pregnancy, they had a breakthrough. The new treatment began to show promising results. Peter's cancer began to regress, and for the first time in a long time, there was real hope for recovery. Charles was by Laura's side every step of the way, offering unconditional support and love. Together, they navigated the complexities of their unique situation, strengthening their relationship in the process. Finally, the day of delivery arrived. Laura gave birth to a beautiful baby boy they named Alfred, after Peter's father. As she held her son in her arms, with Charles and Sophia by her side, and Peter recovering in a nearby room, Laura felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and love. Life had presented them with unimaginable challenges, but it had also gifted them with unexpected miracles. Laura looked around at the unconventional but loving family they had formed, and knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The months following Alfred's birth were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments for everyone. Laura found herself juggling her responsibilities as a mother of 2, her career at the hospital, and her role in Peter's treatment. Little Alfred grew strong and healthy, filling the house with laughter and joy. Sophia took on her role as big sister with enthusiasm, always ready to help with the baby and showering him with love and attention. Charles, true to his word, remained a rock of support for Laura and the children. Despite the unconventional circumstances, his love for Laura only grew stronger with each challenge they faced together. Peter, for his part, responded miraculously well to the new treatment. Gradually, he regained his strength and vitality. Although they were no longer together romantically, Laura and Peter developed a new kind of relationship, based on mutual respect and shared love for their children. One day, while Laura was in the park with Sophia and Alfred, she found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had been her life over the past few years. She watched Sophia pushing Alfred's swing, both children laughing with abandon, and felt her heart swell with love. "What are you thinking about?" asked a familiar voice behind her. Laura turned to see Charles approaching with a smile. "On how lucky I am," Laura replied, leaning against him as he wrapped his arms around her. "In how life can surprise us in the most unexpected ways." Charles nodded, his gaze fixed on the children. "You know, when I was younger, I always imagined I'd have a normal family, wife, 2 kids, a dog maybe. I never would have imagined this." He made a gesture encompassing the children, Laura, and implicitly the whole situation with Peter. Laura looked at him, a twinge of worry in her chest. "Do you regret it?" Charles looked into her eyes, his expression serious. "Not for a second, Laura. Our family may not be conventional, but it's ours, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." Laura felt tears forming in her eyes. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed Charles softly. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "And I you," he replied, holding her tighter. That night, after putting the children to bed, Laura received a call from Peter. His voice sounded louder and clearer than it had in a long time. "Laura," he said, "I have good news. The latest tests show that the cancer is in remission." Laura felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Oh, Peter, that's wonderful," she said, tears of relief running down her cheeks. "It's all thanks to you and Alfred," Peter continued. "I can never thank you enough for not giving up on me." Laura smiled softly. "We're family, Peter. We always will be." After hanging up, Laura joined Charles in the living room. She told him the good news about Peter, and together they celebrated this new chapter in their lives. As they cuddled on the couch, Laura reflected on all they had been through. The pain of betrayal, the shock of family revelations, the joy of new beginnings, the fear of loss, and finally, the hope for a bright future. "You know what?" said Laura, looking at Charles. "I think I finally get it." "What thing?" asked Charles, curious. "Love," Laura replied. "It's not something you can control or define. It's complicated and sometimes painful, but also beautiful and transformative. And in the end, it's what makes us human." Charles smiled, kissing Laura's forehead. "I think you're right," he said softly, "and I'm grateful to be able to experience all those facets of love with you." As they fell asleep in each other's arms, Laura felt at peace. Her life hadn't turned out the way she had planned, but somehow it had turned out even better. She had a family full of love, a job she was passionate about, and a future full of possibilities. The road had been long and full of unexpected twists and turns, but Laura knew it wouldn't change anything. Every challenge, every tear, every moment of doubt had brought her to this point. And as she looked to the future, Laura felt ready for whatever adventure life threw her way, knowing she had the love and support to face anything. As the sun set over the city, bathing her home in a warm golden glow, Laura closed her eyes and smiled. This was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter. And she was excited to see what tomorrow held for her.